Welcome to the Hivery's second annual Entrepreneur Lab, an all-day retreat for women entrepreneurs. I was at a conference. I had just started the Hivery. It was my first year having the Hivery, and I was invited to speak at a really beautiful conference called Woven. And it was incredible. It was here in Mill Valley at the community center, and it was a compilation and collection of women coming together in a similar spirit, coming together to connect, support each other, coming together in the spirit of kindness and the spirit of creating something together in the sisterhood, in the womanhood. And I was really moved by a number of the speakers, but there was one speaker that I had kind of a visceral reaction to. She definitely touched the place in me that felt like a place of truth and a place of that brought up my truest emotions, and that is Nikki Silvestri. So when Nikki agreed to come and speak to us today, I was really honored because I have had experience with Nikki and being in the audience where you sit now, and I know that she brings a really beautiful, powerful story. I want to tell you a little bit about her before I invite her to come on up. Nikki is the founder and CEO of Soil and Shadow, a project development firm working to create systems change while improving relationships between communities. As the co-founder of Live Real and former executive director of the People's Grocery and Green for All, Nikki has built and strengthened social equity for underrepresented populations in food systems, social service, public health, climate solutions, and economic development. She's a nationally recognized thought leader, and her many honors include being named one of the Root's 100 most influential African Americans. And there's more. Nikki regularly forwards the message of equitable economies throughout numerous media channels, including the Huffington Post, the San Francisco Chronicle, which have each featured her writing, and her recent television appearances include All In with Chris Hayes and the Melissa Harris Perry Show on MSNBC. She's a faculty member at the Food Business School. She co-designed and taught one of their inaugural courses called Ethical Leadership in Food Business. She sits on the board of directors of the Business Alliance of Local Living Economies, and she's an advisory board member of MeWe, the Next Gen social network. She began her work in social change throughout the foster care system in Southern California, where she directed foster youth empowerment workshops. She has a master's degree in African American Studies with UCLA, and she currently lives in Oakland with her husband. And one of the reasons I'm most delighted that Nikki is here today is that she's expecting a baby in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So it's a huge honor that she would spend her Sunday with us in such a transformative period of her life. So thank you so much, Nikki. Come on up. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a real honor to be here. Thank you, Grace, so much for inviting me. And one of the reasons, Grace called, and I'm like, I'm very pregnant. She's like, I know what! And one of the reasons that it was so important for me to be here is because what she wanted me to share about, I feel like, is this journey from breakdown to breakthrough. And I am in the midst of another one right now. And I felt like it would be very interesting to share in process, in addition to share about the last one that led me here, throughout that thread of entrepreneurship. So the recent one, the one that Grace did hear about before, is that I was the executive director of 2 different nonprofits. One had a budget of about $500,000, one had a budget of $3 million, and it was climate change in food systems, but from the perspective of the people, which meant it was real serious. Real serious. And when I say real serious, what I mean is that there was this sense of our people are dying, there's real life stuff happening, so this needs to happen, and you need to figure out how to make it happen. And your individual self-care, it was subtle, but your individual self-care isn't necessarily as important as making sure your people aren't dying. Do you have a roof over your head? Yes. Do you have food every day? yes, if your basic needs are met, any other need you have on top of that is not quite valid. Because storms, because police brutality, because food insecurity, because diet-related disease, because, right? So that was the ethos and the meme that I came into as a young professional. In addition to the fact that both of the organizations that I ran, I took over from these very, very powerful men who, I'm learning men are a little different, you know? Especially being pregnant. There's a visceral difference where I'm just like, you can do a red eye and then go ask for $500,000 and then go be on TV and then have a difficult intervention and then get back on a plane to go somewhere else the next day. My body may not be able to do that. My psyche may not be able to do that. Whereas your spouse is at home raising your kids, taking on various emotional burdens for you. So I just was noticing some of these differences in the course of my nonprofit career. And when I became a national executive director, I felt like I was ready for something different, but I walked into that job in the middle of a breakdown and got the feedback that you're 29, you're not nearly as burned out as you think you are, because you can't be, because you're 29. You think you need 6 months off, you actually need 6 weeks off. Just a bunch of different stuff. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I just need to grow up. I need to put on my big girl pants. Exactly, right? I need to grow a pair, and I need to get it done because police brutality and my people. And I found out in the middle of that year that my husband and I were going to really have an intense, probably, journey to conceive a child. And I walked into that experience knowing for sure that I wanted to have a child. So rebuilding an organization that was in need of a lot of strategic wiggling, considering that it had a very strong founder that had done a lot of, it's the octopus thing. Like, the founder can do anything and get love and money. And then the second person comes in and you like, well, octopus. And the funders are like, but you need a strategy. You ain't this other person. You can't do that. That's like the founder thing that I did over and over and over again. And it broke me. And I left at the end of 2014 in a deep, deep, deep breakdown. Because I had walked into 2014 broken, got depleted way further than I ever even knew was possible, and left in such a deep spiritual crisis that I was like, I don't know who I am. What's funny is that Grace heard me talk, and I was still like, the fuck? Literally, like, I was still like right in the middle of it, like, I don't know. I had a breakdown. Right now I'm able to pay my bills, and that's the success story. And, since then there's been this 3-year arc where I had to go really deep into myself around what is it that I want? Because when I graduated from my master's degree in 2008, what I wanted was to be, I wanted to be a national nonprofit executive director, right? Both my parents come from the social change. Well, they're in social services, but I kind of consider that social change world. So that was really all I knew. And I moved up and I was the executive aide at Green for All and then became the executive director 6-7 years later. So there was this arc and this full story. And then the beginning of 2015 was like, what do I want to do? In addition to the fact that I had all of this talk around me where I was getting offers willy-nilly here and there, because if you take the break that you want, you will no longer be relevant and no one's going to care if you want to do all these cool things in 6 months to a year, because people will forget you exist. You have a responsibility to your brand to stay relevant. I was like, who are you? And I surrounded myself by people who care more about my brand than my health. Seriously. That's not okay. So there were some relationships that changed, needless to say, in 2015, both personally and professionally, and a lot of fear. I also had to deal with the reality as a woman and as a woman of color that a lot of the things that I was being offered were not things that are reflective of the fact that I had just run a $3 million nonprofit, right? And I had to go back to them and say, you know, this is great for like a junior organizer. One, I'm not a junior organizer. And two, more than that, I'm curious about what you saw in me that made you think it was okay to offer me something like this. Let's just have a conversation about that. Because $75 an hour, I am not. And it was really hard to be on unemployment having that conversation with people, acting like a boss, when I'm like, so straight up, we got rent. And I don't want to shop at, shopping cart. So that was hard. But I feel like as an entrepreneur, as a woman entrepreneur, that was very, very, very important. Because that was the beginning of my business, was knowing that I had value and knowing that I needed to stand for that value, even when it felt like I was standing for that value off a cliff. And since then, it's been this beautiful journey of, in 2015, me realizing, oh, I don't have to actually hide behind really powerful men who already have a reputation in order to have my own reputation. That was 2015. 2016 was about, oh, I can make real money. Like real money. And I want to. I kind of want to be like wealthy. And not rich, you know what I'm saying, but like wealthy. And I could not say that in the circles that I was in. Thank God for Jenny over there, because she kind of, in the same kind of arc, she was starting sending these emails about fund and fuel your dreams and women entrepreneurs, and I'm like, I'd read her. I was obsessed with your newsletters. That's something we haven't talked about. I would read Jenny's newsletters like this lifeline, like, I can make money and it's okay, and I'm not the devil. Which is like a real thing, right? Which I think gets into this current breakdown that I'm in right now around polarity and being able to hold complexity really deeply. Because I've been a social change activist advocate for so long that you can't unlearn globalization. You can't unlearn how resources flow. I can't unlearn the fact that I know some poor woman or 9-year-old in some country whose name I probably can't pronounce made this outfit, like the whole thing, I'd know that. And that's a complexity. I am a part of this system that is destroying the world. I also want to be wealthy. And I will likely be making money on the backs of millions of people worldwide, just because I live in America and in a Western society. And I did not give myself the space to reconcile those two things, or even try to. I just had to ignore one or the other before, because I didn't have the personal safety, I think, emotional and spiritual safety, to be able to be in that inquiry in a way where I wasn't going to get publicly shamed or privately shamed or any of that. And that was the space I curated for myself as an entrepreneur in 2017, was allowing myself to have the colleagues and the circles where we could be in the complexity and say we don't have an answer to this question, but that's what non-duality is about. Society is complex. I don't need to disown who and what I am because I'm a destroyer. We're all destroyers. The point is that there's a cycle of creation, sustaining, and destruction. And there's indiscriminate destruction, and there's sacred destruction. And I can actually learn how to do sacred destruction. It's kind of one of the roles of women. As you can tell, I got hella deep when I got pregnant. Like, all of this stuff started clicking in, and I started talking about this, and people were like, don't you work with soil? So, switching gears a little bit to what it is practically that I actually do. So I started a business called Soil and Shadow, and that was the evolution of many, many, many years. How am I doing on time? Okay. Great. That was the evolution of many, many, many years of inquiry about what the right answer was when it came to the ecosystem. And one thing about being in the economic development world is that it's not just economic development. I'd be in DC in some of these meetings, And people would be arguing, but not raising their voices. And I'm just sitting there like, it sounds like you don't respect women. So anything this other woman says to you, you're going to say no to. And the woman, you sound like you're a little depressed about something. But, so that means you're not going to hear what he's saying. Like, that's kind of how my brain works, is I would always look at the people dynamics of what was going on in the room. And it felt very clear that at some point, if we don't talk about the people and what's going on with the humans, they're going to argue strategy back and forth at each other and not ever be able to hear, and we're never going to be able to have a real conversation. And I just got sick of it. And that's what Soil and Shadow became. It was this dream of, we're humans, we're animals in a habitat. We have spiritual, emotional, psychological dimensions as we try to be in right harmony with our external environment. But being in harmony with our external environment will be reflective of what's happening in our internal environment. So we have to be able to get deeply thorough about interpersonal and relational change in the external systems change world. And I mean, be Jedis with it, if we're gonna actually create the change we wanna see. So I use soil as a metaphor for what soil fertility is, increasing the complexity of relationships between the beings that live in soil, whether they be microbes or carbon or anything like that. And I talk about social fertility as the same thing, increasing the complexity of the relationships between people in the system. Both of those things create fertility, and fertility is what creates life. We just can't dictate what life it creates, which is real hard for the outcomes-driven crowd, real hard. My contracts thus look very interesting because I have to work with people who get this, and I turn down a lot of work as a result. So that was a real big dream of my heart that really locked in, and it started to generate a lot of revenue. And then I got to this point this year where a lot of different things converged at the same time. I started getting so pregnant that my gray matter started to shrink, and anyone who's been pregnant knows what I mean by that. Like, pregnancy brain, I was like, oh, that's cute. And then I'm on these coaching calls, and I can't remember what someone said, and I'm in business meetings, and I'm losing my words, and I'm like, what is happening? And my midwife says, well, your capacity is a little different. But my intuitive capacity increased by like 7-fold, which was a very interesting kind of swivel to make. And I started asking these deeper questions about, okay, I know I want to be fabulously wealthy. I know I want all the things that I was never allowed to ask for, but there feels like there's something else underneath that. What's my calling? Like, what's underneath my work and my career is my calling and my medicine. And what's that? And that was where the love trust experiment came from, was me realizing that my life kind of represents this pyramid, where the bottom of the pyramid is the interpersonal relationship work that for me has been informed by decades at this point of ceremony and ritual, and having a mother who's a psychologist and also a little nuts, and having a father who has a master's degree in counseling and is also a little nuts, and growing up with foster brothers and having to be in very complex conversations about abuse as a very young child, and I mean, there's so many different traditions and teachers that have not really given me a choice in particular around learning these things. But now that means that I have a medicine basket when it comes to the way that I occur in the world and to my way of being, that feels like it's so integral to my calling in terms of internal and external harmony that it can't be a side project anymore. And so me and a dear friend of mine are coming together to create a new business called the Love Trust Experiment that feels like it was incubated at almost exactly the same time as this child was. And so he's a big part of it, which is really cool. But to have a new business that is actually really the moneymaker in a lot of ways, because Soil and Shadow needs to really only be very, very selective about its clients and be very targeted about the way we work in external change, because we're not just an economic development firm. We talk about social fertility and stuff that if you haven't tried it, you're probably not going to know what I'm talking about. These two businesses together, while being a new mother, that's the midst of the breakdown right now. I was in like sobbing hysterics last night. I sat in my meditation chair this morning like, my husband and I were on the road to this event arguing about what's going to happen on maternity leave. And then I come in and I'm like, hello, my name's Nikki. I'm ready to get on stage. That's my life right now, is this radical, and I'm a poised, graceful, like I build my identity around my grace and my poise, and I feel insane right now. Like just in life, I feel nuts. And my midwife's like, great, you're right on track. But that's really hard for me. So I feel like the breakdown is that, you know, going into new motherhood, I'm gonna have to get messy. Like I'm gonna be covered in like every bodily fluid that has ever existed for weeks. Like, yes, for the rest of my life. Yes, let me change that. Right. So, all of this, right? I can feel myself sweating like, oh Jesus. But I can feel that as an entrepreneur, as a woman entrepreneur, I think what I'll wrap up with is the fact that part of the ethos of Soil and Shadow as well is that we build our ecosystems management work around the healthy male body at its fullest capacity, right? And it's also one of the bases of environmental justice and environmental injustice, is that a pregnant woman's body, in a lot of ways, is the most fragile ecosystem that a human body can be in, even more than a young child in some ways. And we don't build our society around this body, which is why a lot of our systems are out of whack. And which is why children and elders and pregnant women and vulnerable populations are not really well held. And I feel like I said that in my work, but then in real life, as an entrepreneur, I was acting as a man in the prime of his life. That's how I was running my body. And then I just invoked some juju and was like, Soil and Shadow and the Love Trust experiment. And my guides were like, oh, for real? Are you ready? Oh, you ready? You ready to put your money where your mouth is when it comes to how to build your life around the most fragile ecosystem and have everything you want by having really good boundaries and asking for what you need and being a resistant, hard-headed, egotistical, arrogant maniac, which is also a part of me? You're going to resist changing all of those identity constructions. Are you ready for all of that? I wasn't, but I'm in it now. So I careen wildly back and forth between tears and being able to deliver talks like this. And that's just what it's gonna be. And that may actually be the rest of my life. And I just might have to accept that. But then when I come talk to groups of women, that's not insanity and that's not craziness. What that is life. That's fertility, actually. That's what fertility looks like. It looks like being able to hold polarities and extremes all in the same place, not need to reconcile them immediately, let them sort themselves out and create this dark, fertile, rich, fecund combination of decay and creation. And let it all be okay. That's my calling. And I'm really glad that I was able to share it with you. Of course, yeah.
Okay, Christine, you have a question?
Thank you for describing all of our states of being pregnant or not pregnant. So thank you. I feel that in this tumultuous time that we're having to stand in and thrive in a heavily experience of being in complexity and duality. And so I honor how you've been able to model that even as you're also growing a human being. So thank you. My question is in this environment that I just described, how do we as women of color, of women that are white women, of women of all kinds of backgrounds, come together and put down looking at each other's differences and unify right now? What's your sense of that and what we could be doing together to collectively model unification for men, for the human race in general?
Mm-hmm. So it's funny about that question. Even before I had language around fertility, I was a biomimetic fan, right, in biomimicry, and looking at the way that ecosystems work and seeing how social systems can model that. And so the question that I hold in hearing you is, where in ecosystems is there unity? And I've had a lot of trouble finding unity kind of in the way we conceive of it in nature. Because there are differences and diverse, and the way that ecosystems talk about differences is diversity, right? And when there is a lot of diversity in a system, there's life and there's health. When there's a certain type of diversity in a system, it breaks down. So I think my question is, how do we have and hold diversity in a way that creates the conditions for life, instead of holding diversity in a way that breaks us apart, right, and destroys the ecosystem? And one of the ways that I hold that, and one of the reasons I talk about social fertility, is that social fertility is kind of what I try to model, and what I work with in my soil and shadow work with my clients, is that increasing the complexity of relationships for me is being able to say, yo, I hate you. And the other person to be like, that hurts. And for me to be like, word, is that our starting point? Is it real? Fantastic. What's after this? And there is a pathway, because for me, social fertility is about holding some very basic tenets, which I think is actually the core of your question. Like, what are the basic tenets of what diversity in life look like? And for me, it's moving from a place of being real to taking personal responsibility in a way that frees up a space for connection. It's that 1, 2, 3 step. Because, pushing at each other and externalizing responsibility is not the way you breed connection. But you can't also breed connection falsely. And I feel like that first step of being real is a lot of times skipped because it's too uncomfortable. But that can't be skipped. So if we're able to be real with each other in a way that brings up all of the guilt, all of the shame, all of the mommy, daddy, and I'm in it. So I don't say this lightly, like this is the conversation my husband and I were literally having on the road, where I'm shaking like personal responsibility. We can't be connected if I'm externalizing responsibility. So I'm not saying that this is easy, but I am saying that I feel like there is a 1, 2, 3 blow by blow around taking personal responsibility and ownership, leading to real deep connection. So that's what I would say. Modeling being real, modeling then taking that realness and returning it to the source of where it came from, which is us. And then having that breed real connection. And from that real connection, that's where unity, the ecosystem unity and fertility flourish.
I just wanted to say I totally understand what you're saying about you've got all this pressure and you feel crazy. And for me, learning how to deal with all the pressure that I'm under starting a business, and then being able to say to my husband, you know what, I need to go in the corner and play Candy Crush. So don't talk to me, It's like you've got to be able to just tune out, go to your happy place. Sadly, it's Candy Crush for me. But, that I think that's absolutely right on.
Thank you.
Anything else before you? Okay. Oh, there is one.
There was
Sorry.
one back there.
I have a great concern about, like many of us, about social media and what it's doing to that. So I don't know if you could just speak to that a little bit. I mean, it's a big topic, but.
Good old social media. So the good thing that I think social media has done is it's created an invitation for all of us to find the troll within. Because one of the tools that I use to go from realness to personal responsibility is I'm in all things. There's nothing out there that I don't have the capacity to be myself. And the more triggered I am by it, that actually means the more I am of it that I'm suppressing and repressing, or else it wouldn't be bothering me so much. And internet trolls really, they just bother me, which obviously means there's a part of me that just loves crushing someone like a bug if they try to step to me, and I'm like, don't you know who I am? Don't you know who you're talking to? So I feel like that's how I've used social media, is I've seen it as this incredible opportunity to witness our inner childs being played out on a massive scale. And our inner childs are not to be disrespected, because many of us didn't reconcile them because we come from a society that has completely erased rites of passage rituals that help us go from being children to adults. And when you have a society that has erased rites of passage rituals, and then you give them a platform to anonymously express themselves, what you get is inner children played out on a massive scale, potentially even governance. So I'm thinking, and really my hope with social media is that I actually think there will be a critical mass at some point, and we're getting there. We're getting real close, where it's being used to governance, right? Like the 2016 election was a perfect example of us getting to a threshold of how much can we express our inner children with no limits? How much can we do that in a way that's safe? And we're getting to the point where it's getting very dangerous. Just really concretely, really dangerous. And then there will be a feedback loop at some point where that danger is going to have to be mitigated. And so I feel like my responsibility, and what I would actually ask of all of us, is to be ready. Because there will need to be the parent figures that come in real quick when that happens, who can set limits and say, you are not wrong to feel what you're feeling, and you need a timeout so that the household can keep running. And I love you. So that's what I'd say to that. Thank you.